You know what's wild? It's how someone can walk away from you, ghost you, act like they don't care at all. And then in just one tiny moment, everything shifts. That 1% moment, the moment they realize they still want you. And here's the twist. It usually doesn't happen when you're chasing them, texting them, asking for clarity. It happens when you're doing the one thing they never expected. Moving on. Today, I want to give you the 6 emotional triggers that quietly wake up an avoidant person's desire. And if you're wondering, do they even miss me? This will give you clarity and, most importantly, power. At first, the silence feels like a win for the avoidant. They finally have the space they crave. No pressure to reply, no emotional confrontation, no vulnerability to navigate. They convince themselves that distance is peace. In their mind, silence equals control. The emotional noise fades, and for a while, they breathe easier thinking they've escaped the tension of intimacy. But what they don't realize is that true connection doesn't vanish with space. It waits in the quiet, watching what they do next. This is where the internal contradiction starts. The avoidant might think, I needed this space, but something strange begins to happen. Your absence stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling too quiet. The stillness begins to echo. Days go by without your name lighting up their screen. No casual check-ins, no warmth, no tiny reminders of your presence. They don't say it out loud, but something starts to gnaw at them. A subtle, growing discomfort. They expected space to soothe them, but instead it leaves them with a kind of emptiness they didn't prepare for. The irony. It's not even what you do that wakes them up. It's what you don't do. You don't chase. You don't beg for their attention. You don't try to fix it. And that's what breaks their pattern. Because most people, especially those who truly care, cling when someone pulls away. But when you do the exact opposite, you disrupt their emotional script. You stop being the one who needs too much and become the one they realize they may have taken for granted. And slowly, the power dynamic begins to shift. You're no longer the source of pressure. They are. They start questioning themselves. Did they really let go? Did I matter to them? Why am I uncomfortable now? These questions don't come all at once, but they build. Your absence, once a comfort, now feels like a mistake they can't easily undo. That's when the 1% moment begins. Not in the heat of an argument, not in the aftermath of closure, but in the quiet space they once swore they needed until they realized it was the beginning of losing you. One of the most powerful, unexpected shifts in any relationship dynamic happens when the person who once seemed affected, anxious, or emotionally invested suddenly begins to thrive, and not in a performative way, not in a look what you lost social media stunt, but in a deep, grounded, calm way that says, I found my center again. For the avoidant, this shift is confusing. They're used to equating closeness with emotional volatility. So when you walk away, not with resentment, but with self-respect, it disrupts the pattern they've come to expect. Avoidants are often drawn to emotional intensity, even when they say they hate drama. It validates their belief that love is overwhelming or burdensome. So when you remove yourself from the dynamic and genuinely begin to invest in your own peace, health, and joy, it startles them. Suddenly, you're not playing the role they assigned you. in their story. You're not the emotionally reactive one. You're not waiting around for closure. You're not making their absence the center of your world. You're doing something they didn't predict. You're becoming more without them. This is when something subtle but powerful starts to creep in: regret. Not always about the breakup itself, but about how they saw you. They realized they might have misunderstood your depth, underestimated your resilience, or dismissed your value too quickly. While they assumed you would be the one stuck in your feelings, they now see you building a better life, step by step, without them in it. And that creates a sharp contrast between the version of you they left behind and the version of you that's now thriving. That contrast is hard to ignore. It challenges their ego, sure, but it also stirs something deeper, because even though they didn't say it, even though they may have distanced themselves emotionally, there was always a part of them that noticed the care you gave, the loyalty you showed, the emotional availability you brought. Seeing you flourish confirms that you were never the problem. And that's where the 1% moment intensifies. Not just because they miss you, but because they now have to ask themselves why they pushed away someone who clearly didn't need fixing, someone who simply needed to be met where they were. It doesn't take a grand event for someone to realize they miss you. In fact, it's almost always the smallest, most unassuming triggers that sneak up on them. A song they used to hear when you were together. The smell of your perfume or cologne lingering somewhere unexpectedly. A scene in a movie that mirrors a moment you once shared. These little things, often insignificant to outsiders, carry an emotional weight that crashes in without warning. And for someone avoidant, someone who prides themselves on compartmentalizing their feelings, these reminders feel like emotional ambushes. Avoidants are masters of distraction. They don't dive deep. They skim the surface. They'll fill their days with work, workouts, social media, casual flings, anything to keep from sitting still long enough to feel the quiet ache inside. But the thing about memory is it doesn't ask permission. It shows up when the noise dies down, when they're driving alone, when a friend says something that echoes your words, when a place reminds them of where you once laughed. And in those split seconds, the illusion of detachment crumbles just enough to let something reel in. They may try to brush it off at first. It's nothing, or just a weird memory. But deep down, it stirs emotions they thought they buried. Why now? Why this moment? Why does it still affect them? These questions don't go away. In fact, the more they push them down, the more they pop back up. Because those reminders are not just about you. They're about what they felt with you and what they never fully processed when you were gone. It's not nostalgia. It's unresolved emotion, and it lingers. That moment, fleeting but powerful, is often the beginning of emotional honesty, because up until that point, the avoidant has been telling themselves a story. This wasn't that deep. I'm better off. That wasn't right. But that quiet, unexpected trigger cuts through the narrative. It reminds them that their connection with you did matter. More than they let on, maybe more than they even knew at the time. And for someone who's built walls their whole life, even a glimpse of real vulnerability can feel overwhelming. That's when the doubt starts creeping in. That's when they wonder, did I walk away too soon? One of the deepest needs an avoidant personality has in relationships is the need to stay in control of their emotions, their time, their sense of independence. Control is their armor. It allows them to keep others at a safe distance while avoiding the vulnerability that closeness demands. So long as they believe they're the one holding the emotional reins, deciding when to engage, when to disappear, when to come close, they feel protected. And as long as you're the one pursuing, explaining, or waiting, they're safe in that role. But the moment that energy shifts, something unexpected happens. Their control is replaced by curiosity. It starts subtly. You stop reaching out first. You stop trying to fix things. You stop pouring your emotional energy into a connection that only flows one way. And it's not done out of anger. It's done out of self-respect. That difference is everything, because you don't become cold or bitter. You become quietly unavailable. You begin to redirect your energy inward, and suddenly, without even meaning to, you become unpredictable. The avoidant, who once believed they had you figured out, now starts to wonder what changed. This shift is powerful because it flips the emotional script. Instead of being the person waiting for their attention, you become the one they're watching from afar. They start to notice things they didn't before: your growing confidence, your new boundaries, the calm in your voice. You're no longer asking for answers. You've stopped trying to pull them closer, and what they once viewed as security, knowing they had you emotionally tethered, is now gone. That loss of predictability makes them curious in a way they haven't been in a long time. And curiosity is the gateway to emotional re-engagement, not necessarily because they're suddenly ready to commit, but because the narrative they've built in their head no longer fits. They start wondering, did I misread them? Were they stronger than I thought? Have they moved on? Those questions, born from a shift in your energy, disrupt the emotional control they once held so tightly. And ironically, that loss of control is what finally gets their attention, not through drama, not through demands, but through the quiet power of your detachment. There's a very specific fear that hits an avoidant person, but it doesn't arrive right away. It doesn't surface in the early days after they've pulled away or ended things. In fact, at first, they often feel confident in their decision. They tell themselves they needed space, that it wasn't the right time, that they were protecting themselves, or you, from something they weren't ready to face. But all of that reassurance starts to fade when they finally look up and realize you're no longer standing still. That slow building fear begins when they sense, maybe for the first time, that you might actually be gone for good. It's one thing for someone to take a break or pull back emotionally. Avoidants do that regularly to maintain control over their inner world. But they often operate from the belief that the other person will still be there, that the door they quietly closed will remain unlocked. So when they see signs that you're no longer holding space for them, when you're dating again, glowing differently, making plans without looking back, that's when the ground beneath them begins to shift, not because you've moved on with someone else, but because you've moved on within yourself. This realization doesn't just stir longing, it shakes up their sense of certainty. Avoidants aren't usually comfortable with emotional depth, but they are often attached to the feeling of being needed or wanted on their terms. When you're no longer emotionally dependent on them, they lose the emotional leverage they didn't even know they were relying on. The person who once seemed endlessly available is now out of reach. And that scares them, because if you can live without them, maybe even love without them, it means you weren't waiting. You weren't frozen in time. You were healing and evolving. That's when the avoidant starts to ask themselves questions they've avoided all along. Did I underestimate what we had? Was that connection really that easy to replace? Why do I feel this pit in my stomach now? The fear that you've genuinely moved on creates an emotional gap they can't easily close. It forces them to confront the idea that their absence didn't devastate you. It freed you. And nothing wakes up an emotionally distant person faster than realizing the world they once fit into is moving forward without them in it. Avoidants rarely feel safe in relationships, not because the other person is unsafe, but because intimacy itself feels threatening to them. It pokes at their defenses, challenges their independence, and brings emotions to the surface they don't know how to handle. So when they meet someone who offers steady love, open communication, and emotional consistency, their instinct is often to pull away. Ironically, the very safety they crave is the thing they run from. But over time, and usually only in hindsight, they begin to recognize that the sense of calm they once had with you wasn't ordinary. It was rare. You weren't perfect. You may have had disagreements. But there was something about the way you listened, how you tried to understand them, how you made room for their complexity without demanding they be someone they weren't. That kind of emotional safety doesn't scream. It doesn't beg for recognition. It simply exists until it's gone. And once you've stepped away and that energy is no longer there, they start noticing how different everything feels. The new people they meet don't offer that same grounding presence. They might be fun, flirty, even exciting, but they're not safe, not in the way you were. This is when the avoidant begins to reflect, not just on you, but on how they felt when they were around you. For people who struggle with closeness, they often don't process their feelings in the moment, but absence creates space. And in that space, they begin to remember what they were too guarded to feel clearly before, the way your presence quieted their overthinking, how being with you didn't require them to perform or be on all the time, the subtle way you encouraged their growth without controlling them. They might not have had the language for it then, but now they start to recognize it for what it was: emotional safety. And here's what makes that realization so powerful. It's almost impossible to fake or find that kind of connection once it's gone. They may try to recreate it, but it never feels quite the same. And suddenly, you're no longer just a person from their past. You become a benchmark, a quiet standard they didn't know they had until now. That safety, that acceptance, that quiet emotional sanctuary, they didn't just miss you. They missed the version of themselves that only existed when they were with you. So what do you do with all of this? You understand that, yes, avoidants have those 1% moments. They do realize what they lost. They do miss the safety, the calm, the love you gave without conditions. But you don't live your life waiting for that moment, because by the time they feel it, you may already be far beyond it. Your job was never to convince someone of your value. Your job was to stand in it. And if they only see it once you're gone, that's not your burden. It's their lesson. Let them have their realizations. Let them replay the memories. But you move forward knowing that the version of you who gave with an open heart, who loved honestly, and who chose peace over chaos, that version is irreplaceable. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And the right person won't need to lose you to figure that out.